We've heard them talk about abolishing ICE before, but she's now said she wants to abolish the entire department. And we would just remind everyone, the Department of Homeland Security is comprised of approximately 22 agencies. They undertake fundamental cyber, intel operations for the nation. Secret Service is part of the Department of Homeland Security. FEMA, part of the Department of Homeland Security. It is a crucial agency and a crucial set of operations that keep this nation, keep our citizens safe. And the level of just absolute irresponsibility now that we are seeing in the Democratic side among someone who clearly is one of the intellectual leaders now of the Democratic Party is really stunning. And we will continue to fight as Republicans to make sure we're doing everything we can, everything necessary to uphold our constitutional obligation to defend this nation. And with that, I will turn things over to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Thornberry, to talk more about the National Defense Authorization Act.
Thank you, Liz. I think it's essential for us all to remember what this bill is about. It's about Congress exercising its constitutional responsibilities to support the troops and protect American national security. And I think for the members of the Armed Services Committee, we are willing to work with anyone to achieve that goal. We are not willing to support a bill that backtracks from the progress that we have begun to make in rebuilding our military, repairing our military, and doing better against some of our peer adversaries. Some of the concerns we have, of course, is that this bill is $17 billion below what the president asked for and $17 billion below what the Senate passed 2 weeks ago by a vote of 86-8. Now, that's not just about numbers. It means it cuts hypersonics research, where we're behind the Chinese. It cuts repairs to F-15s that are old and too often have challenges with availability so that they can fly. It cuts training. Item after item is less than the Department of Defense asked for in this bill, and that has real consequences for the men and women who serve. As Liz mentioned, it prevents deployment of low-yield nuclear weapon. This was a debate we had last year. We had votes on it last year. This is a decision that has been endorsed by all of the NATO countries. So we are always hearing about standing up to the Russians. Well, here's a decision NATO, each of the countries in NATO has made to stand up to the Russian doctrine and low-yield weapons, and unfortunately the House Democrats want to backtrack from that decision. Bringing prisoners from Gitmo has been an issue that we have agreed upon for 10 years. This bill is different. Tying the president's hands as far as supporting border operations, this bill is different. So those are the concerns coming out of committee. But unfortunately now with the Rules Committee action, they are self-executing an amendment that has had no debate. Includes mandatory spending without offsets, includes a whole variety of things like family leave that doesn't have anything to do with the Department of Defense. It's an obvious attempt to try to attract votes on the other side. I also have to say that for the first time, the Rules Committee is very one-sided in the amendments it makes in order. Of the 439 amendments made in order, 340 of them are Democratic amendments, 98 are Republican amendments. Generally, it's about 50-50. Of the big substantive debates, 63 are Democrat amendments, 2 are Republican. We've never had a defense authorization bill this one-sided before. Let me just finish with emphasizing this point. It's not about us. It's not about the conflicts within the Democratic caucus. It's about doing the right thing by the troops and protecting American national security. This bill doesn't get there, but we stand ready to work with anyone who wants to get there and advance our national security interests.
I want to thank Mac Thornberry for his leadership and the entire Armed Services Committee on the Republican side for their continued leadership to try to make sure that our Defense Department has the tools that they need so our men and women in uniform can train safely and be able to defend our national defense in a safe and effective manner. Historically, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, has been a very bipartisan bill, a bill where both sides come together, put their other differences on the side, and work for what's best for the defense of our nation. Unfortunately, that didn't happen this year in the House. I would urge Speaker Pelosi to go take heed at what the Senate did last week. By an 86-8 vote, they came together where Republican and Democrat leaders all voted for their NDAA bill, a very bipartisan bill that focuses on making the right priorities for our national defense. Unfortunately, the House goes in the opposite direction, and they're not done yet. Not only did the bill out of committee take a very harsh, I think in many ways, anti-defense approach to make it a very partisan bill, that's still not enough for them because they still don't have the votes to pass it. And so instead of going to Mac Thornberry and other Republican leaders on the House side to put together a bipartisan bill that can get the votes to pass, they're going in the opposite direction. They're taking a far left shift and going even worse for our nation's defense to try to bring amendments to appease the radical left socialist base of Speaker Pelosi's wing. And we're seeing the internal fight that they've been having for the last few weeks. It's getting even worse where they're fighting amongst themselves. Why don't they stop the fighting and start working with Republicans to get real solutions to the problems we're facing? I mean, even on something like securing the border and giving our Border Patrol agents the tools that they need to help take care of these young kids. You saw many Democrats who are still making a lot of false claims at the president that voted against giving Border Patrol agents the ability to buy diapers for young kids. Our Border Patrol agents were paying out of their own pockets for diapers and other basic supplies for children coming across the border, and they wouldn't even vote for that basic funding. So that shows you how far left they've moved. The final point, if you're looking at where Speaker Pelosi is going next week, they're talking about bringing a bill to the floor to increase the minimum wage. If you look at the bill they're planning on bringing to the floor next week, the CBO report that came out should be alarming to everybody in America who believes in trying to become part of the middle class, who wants to be able to get an entry-level job so that they can then move up and be able to achieve the American dream for themselves. The report showed that about 3.7 million people could lose their jobs if Speaker Pelosi's bill were to pass. Now think about that. That's the entire state of Oklahoma losing their job because of a bill that Speaker Pelosi wants to bring to the floor. It's so radical that even the Democrat mayor of Baltimore vetoed a similar increase in the minimum wage proposal because she noted how it would be devastating to job loss. You're seeing in Seattle when they increased the minimum wage, they did a report and it showed how devastating it is for middle-class families, how it actually lowers overall wages. We're seeing wages grow right now. Our economy is booming. We are the envy of the world, and we've got more job openings than there are people looking for work. With wage growth because we cut taxes, because we got regulations under control. The last thing we need is the government to come in and undermine that success by passing a bill that would literally eviscerate up to 3.7 million jobs. So every Democrat that's thinking about voting for that bill next week should be asking themselves, what am I going to say? What would they say to those 3.7 million people that would lose their jobs, to families, millions of families in America that would fall below the poverty wage because of their vote? How can they justify that? They should be working with us to solve problems.
Thank you, Mr. Whip. I want to thank Mac Thornberry for his service. This is a defining week in Congress. This is a defining week because we'll study what Congress has done historically. For decades, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, has been bipartisan. In those decades, Democrats have been in the majority, Republicans have been in the majority. But every time we had one motto, that the troops came first. The troops came before politics. This week it all changed. This week was the defining point that it's not the Democratic Party we know of the past. This is a new socialist Democratic Party. You listen to Mac Thornberry walk you through the agreements that were made prior. Not just with America, but with America's closest allies within NATO. And this new socialist Democratic Party wants to break from that. When you looked at history and you looked at making this a bipartisan bill? The amendments. When Republicans were in the majority last, more than 50% of those amendments were Democrats. Overwhelmingly one-sided. Then we watched what transformed in Congress just 2 weeks ago. When we left, again, this new Socialist Democratic Party tried to make it very partisan, waited more than 58 days to do anything on the border. When they found a bipartisan bill on the Senate side, they continued to fight it. The same scenario is happening now. I was hoping that the Socialist Democratic Party would learn a lesson 2 weeks ago. I was hoping they would look across the Capitol into the Senate to look what bipartisanship looks like. That the Democratic leadership voted for that supplemental bill, 84 votes. The NDAA out of the Senate even has more, 86 votes. The Democratic leadership, Leader Schumer, he voted for the NDAA. They found the way to keep the tradition of this country, that you do not bring politics into the national defense. Only this Congress can do that. But there is an opportunity to change. There is a moment in time before this week ends that we put the troops before politics. I do not think there'll be any Republican voting for the NDAA as it shows today. But if they were to bring the Senate bill up onto this House floor, you would find a large bipartisan vote, just as the Senate found. Speaker Pelosi should not waste our time, but more importantly, should not destroy the reputation that this Congress has made when it comes to the NDAA. Our walk back for the commitment that we made on a bipartisan basis just 2 years ago to help rebuild this military and the defense of this nation. Last point I want to raise, I want to take a moment to thank all the first responders in my district. During the break, we had numerous earthquakes out in eastern Kern. It is amazing to go through a 7.1 earthquake, larger than the Northridge, and to not have the casualty throughout. But the first responders did an amazing job. But we'll need to rebuild them from our military base to China Lake to the families that are sitting out there today. And I thank the first responders. I also thank the President for signing the declaration and for being able to rebuild and move forward. With that, let's open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, where do you think the USMCA is at, and do you think it can be passed this year?
I think if the USMCA comes to the floor, it will pass. That all hinges on the Speaker. It would be important to pass this before we left for the August break. It would make America stronger with every statistic that you see. It will make us stronger in our negotiations with China. It is needed, and I think there's great support on all sides. I know there's a working group, but the working group should come to some solutions now so we can get this done in the next 2 weeks. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think the Secretary of Labor, Alex Acosta, should resign?
You know, this is a very serious, when I look at and seeing what Epstein is very disturbing to me, this man is even out walking around. I know the President said yesterday that he was going to look into it and review this, and I'll leave it up to the President.
Last question.
Yes.
So yesterday, after Joan Perry lost her primary,
Mhm.
are you worried that that's going to be kind of the trajectory for GOP women with the number of women in?
No, when I see the number of women who are running in this across the country, overwhelmingly the majority of our candidates are women. The biggest challenge ever for women and minorities are always within the primary. You look at Joan Perry, was an amazing candidate, first-time candidate, pediatrician. To even get to a runoff running against Greg Murphy was an excellent candidate, was elected before, a doctor as well. The voters were able to make that decision, but she was able to make a runoff, having never run before. I credit both of them in the campaign, the way they handled the campaign as well. No, I think from the start, having never run before, this was a great improvement, and I look forward to seeing more women elected in this Republican new Congress coming in.
Every single Republican women in the House, including Liz Cheney,
Yes.
Joan Perry, but only 8 Republican men did. Do you think that male colleagues in the House have to do more to get women over the finish line, in primaries included?
I think people are going to have to do more, yes, to help through for women and minorities. But when you make that equation that only 8 males, when you look at overall, a lot of people normally don't get involved in primaries. It was a very telling case that how strong Joan Perry was, that she got so many people to endorse her. You look overwhelmingly, the majority of people didn't endorse in the race. And remember, races are won and lost in their own districts. I thought Joan Perry did an excellent job coming from never run before. I think Greg Murphy gets a lot of credit. He was elected, and he'll be elected to serve in Congress as well. And he deserves that because he got elected by his peers in his district. The district has the say at the end of the day. But the one thing I would take away from your questions is, how much support did Joan Perry get? A tremendous amount of support. So that is a fundamental difference within this new Republican Party than you found in the past. She had the opportunity. She had the backing behind it, and she got the endorsements where other people would not. So I credit all. You get into the arena, and at the end of the day, the voters decide. But I think Joan Perry has a history, a future that can compete in other places as well. But I congratulate Mr. Murphy, and he'll make an excellent member of Congress, and we'll look forward to having him serve it with us. Thank you very much.